One of my favourite Christmas traditions is the Boxing Day walk, when you head out into the countryside to blow away the lingering effects of all that festive food and booze. While I'm out enjoying the fresh air of the great outdoors, my thoughts turn to the landscape and its history. How did it get to look like this? How long have these fields, hedgerows and roads been here? And what happened in the past to influence how the landscape developed? As well as digging up old relics, archaeologists try to understand historic landscapes in this way by looking for clues in the patterns of the villages, fields and roads around us, and in earthwork remains, such as the ridges and furrows of areas of former medieval cultivation. We also use old maps, documents, even the names of places can give us clues to understanding past landscapes. The remains that archaeologists uncover during their excavations also help us understand how sites and their wider landscapes were used in the past. One such excavation was undertaken by Cotswold Archaeology in 2018 at Cheddington in Buckinghamshire, the results of which allowed us to consider the wider historic landscape of the area. Cheddington lies just north of the Chilterns, on the clay soils of the Aylesbury Vale. Like very many villages in England, its origins stretch back into Anglo-Saxon times, and it was certainly well established by the time it was recorded in the Domesday Book in the late 11th century. This map shows the village as it was in the early 19th century, spread out along the High Street, which is believed to follow the line of an earlier Roman road. To the west, these earthworks are probably the remains of the medieval manor of Cheddington, and to the north is the church of St Giles, which dates back to the 12th century. Our 2018 investigations took place here, on the western side of the village, next to the Roman road. Our work started with a survey to record slight earthworks that were apparent in all three fields under development, and this was followed by excavation within the central field. Stripping of this area revealed the remains of numerous ditches and pits, and from the pottery sherds recovered during excavation, we were able to date many of these features and so work out the sequence of development on site. Some important prehistoric and Roman remains were found at our site, but this part of the site story focuses on its medieval archaeology. The early 19th century map shows a farmstead just to the southeast of our excavation, and features dating to the medieval period suggest that this farm had its origins way back in the 11th century, and so would have been a part of one of the Cheddington landholdings listed in the Domesday Book. The earliest of these features was a small enclosure in the eastern corner of the site, perhaps for keeping animals, and a trackway leading from it to the southwest. By the 13th century, the enclosure and trackway had been replaced by paddocks situated next to the adjacent farm. Although many of these boundary ditches were recut in the centuries that followed, this basic pattern of farm paddocks and fields to the northwest remained throughout the rest of the medieval and post-medieval periods within our site, and it was recorded with the adjacent farmhouse on our early 19th century map. This map is important in the history of our site as it allows us to understand something of the early 19th century landscape which, as well as the village, the church and the manor, included the hamlet of West End that had grown up around the manor house. It also shows that these fields to the northwest of the village still retained the cultivation strips or furlongs of former medieval open fields, the agricultural practice that we see fossilised as ridge and furrow earthworks today. Of particular note is this trackway in the northern part of our site, which provided access to the fields, as traces of this trackway were recorded during our earthwork survey. The map also shows us the irregular nature of the routeways and public open spaces that existed around Cheddington in the early 19th century, including village greens in Cheddington and West End, and wide trackways that probably originated as droveways for the movement of farm stock. The map speaks of piecemeal development over many centuries, resulting in this irregular pattern of routes, boundaries and buildings within the landscape. By the time the 1880 Ordnance Survey map was surveyed, this landscape looked very different, following enclosure of the former medieval open fields. Around Cheddington, this process included rationalisation of the local routeways and open spaces. The wide droveways were gone, as was most of West End and its green, and the trackway within our site was relocated to the north, where a new road now ran past the manor and beyond. Within just a few decades, a landscape that had evolved over centuries had been reorganised and radically altered in the name of agricultural progress. The landscape around our site hasn't changed that much since the late 19th century, except to the east, where the village has grown ever larger. I find it fascinating to think that whilst some of these roads have only been around for maybe 150 years, others probably date back 2,000 years or more, and yet others that were a part of the landscape for centuries have all but disappeared. So, if you're thinking about a Boxing Day walk this year, why not look at an old map online beforehand? See what the landscape looked like in the 19th century. Maybe try to imagine what it looked like further back in history, and perhaps gain a deeper appreciation of the landscape that your walk takes you through.